And since it doesn't take faith as such to recognize a miracle, if we can make a good case to these friends or relatives that this particular miracle is a historical fact, that has the potential to open a door to an authentic faith. And that really happens. So that's the first reason. The second reason is because this miracle in itself has a profound meaning, and it confirms the truth of a message of the utmost importance for each one of us here. The utmost importance. So let's turn to the question. The miracle we're going to look at, we're going to consider it from the point of view as a historical event. We're talking about the miracle of the sun at Fatima on October 13th, 1917. And again, we're going to consider it from the point of view as a historical event. At the time of the miracle, Portugal was ruled by Freemasons. For months, O Século. Now this was the anti-Catholic liberal daily newspaper of Lisbon, had been regularly mocking the events in Fatima, using both cartoons and articles. Reporting on the July apparition in mocking terms, that's the one where they got the message, the paper reported, quote, "The children intoned a funeral chant, made epileptic gestures, and fell into ecstasy," close quote. According to the paper, the real reason for all the commotion up at Fatima was the clergy were hoping to make a pile of money by locating a new source of mineral water up there, just like at Lourdes. Another Portuguese newspaper reported on the events of August 13th in an article entitled, quote, "Fanaticism in Action, the miracle," they put that in quotes, "the miracle of Fatima," close quote. So that's the title of it, Fanaticism in Action, the miracle of Fatima. In this article, speaking of the fanaticism up in Fatima, the author speaks of, quote, "the urgent need to combat this evil, which continues to extend its dark tentacles to squeeze and asphyxiate all Portuguese society," close quote. And all this blasphemous nonsense was actually welcomed by the readers, because at that time, Lisbon was so dominated by atheists that in 1915 it had actually been proclaimed to be the atheist country, capital of the world. So in order to set the miracle in its proper historical context, we need to recognize the extremely hostile, deeply Freemasonic cultural environment of the press and the elites in Portugal in 1917, characterized by a mocking disbelief in anything and everything having to do with Catholicism, including a complete rejection of even the possibility of miracles. How many witnesses were present at the miracle? Dr. Almeida Garrett, a physician, estimated the number of spectators at over 100,000. Avelina de Almeida, now he's the editor-in-chief of O Século, so that's the anti-clerical newspaper which had been mocking the events of previous months, went there himself, and he states, quote, "On October 13th, according to the calculations of completely unbiased people, some 50,000 people were gathered at the Moor of Fatima," close quote. Now his estimate by the Freemason is considered to be a minimum figure, which is why the majority of historians estimate there were probably somewhere around 70,000 witnesses in the crowd. Why were roughly 70,000 witnesses gathered in a muddy field, standing in the rain in Fatima on October 13th? Because for 3 months, since July 13th, 3 small children who could neither read nor write, Lucia dos Santos, now she was 10 years old, and 2 cousins, Francisco Marta and Jacinta Marta. Francisco at the time was 9 and Jacinta was 7. They had been predicting that Our Lady would perform a great miracle on October 13th. A miracle had been publicly announced 3 months in advance as to the precise date, time, and place. There is literally nothing like this in the entire history of the world. And that's saying something. This is literally an unparalleled historical event. The precise date, time, and place of a public miracle had been announced 3 months in advance by illiterate peasant children from a tiny village in the hills of Portugal. That's why 70,000 witnesses were present. Who were the witnesses? Men from all social classes and all cultural levels. The undecided but curious, the faithful that were confident of seeing a miracle, scientists, skeptics, unbelievers, even fanatics looking for a chance to amuse themselves and pour scorn on the believers, all were gathered there side by side in Fatima. One Portuguese historian notes, quote, "At the moment of the great miracle, there were present some of the most illustrious men of letters in the arts and sciences, and almost all were unbelievers, coming out of simple curiosity, led by the prediction of the seers," close quote. This is also why it's an absolutely unparalleled historical event. You have thousands upon thousands of hostile witnesses. What did the witnesses see? Although we could cite testimonies for hours, literally, for the sake of time, we'll glance at a few testimonies of eyewitnesses. One historian notes, quote, "The witnesses of the event were indeed innumerable. Their testimonies agree, and we are flooded with the documents they have left us," close quote. So I'm just cutting and splicing quotes, putting it together from different eyewitnesses so you get an idea what happened. Although the rain had been steadily pelting down all morning, it suddenly stopped. And just as suddenly, the sky cleared. This abrupt chain of weather took all the eyewitnesses by surprise. It was a day of heavy and continuous rain, but a few moments before the miracle, it stopped raining. Suddenly, all the clouds disappeared without the slightest breeze, and the sun was shining in a clear sky. There were also changes of color in the atmosphere. I looked first at the nearest objects, and then extended my glass further afield as far as the horizon. I saw that everything had assumed an amethyst color. Objects around me, the sky and the atmosphere, were of the same color. An oak tree cast a shadow nearby of this color on the ground. Soon I heard a peasant near me shout out in tones of amazement, "Look, that lady is all yellow." And in fact, everything both near and far had changed, taking on the color of old yellow damask. People looked as if they were suffering from jaundice, and I recall a sensation of amusement at seeing them look so ugly and unattractive. My own hand was the same color, close quotes. So the miracle starts with the rain suddenly stopping and the sky clearing, and then the sunlight goes to different colors of the rainbow. For a description of what happened next, we'll turn to Avelino del Almeida. Nobody can accuse this guy of being a favorable witness. As we said, he's the chief editor of O Seculo, the Freemasonic newspaper, the Daily in Lisbon, who traveled to Fatima in order to report on the events. This account is taken from his article in the Freemasonic newspaper. Quote, "And then we witnessed a unique spectacle, an incredible spectacle, unbelievable if you did not witness it. From the road where the carriages were crowded together, where hundreds of persons had stayed for want of sufficient courage to advance across the muddy ground, we saw the huge crowd turn towards the sun, which appeared at its zenith, clear of the clouds. It resembled a disk of silver, and it was possible to stare at it without the least discomfort. It did not burn the eyes. It did not blind. We would say that it produced an eclipse. Then a tremendous cry rang out, and the crowd nearest us were heard to shout, 'Miracle, miracle, marvel, marvel.' The attitude of the people takes us back to biblical times. Dumbfounded, with their heads uncovered, they contemplated the blue sky. Before their dazzled eyes, the sun trembled. It made strange and abrupt movements outside of all cosmic laws, and according to the typical expression of the peasants, the sun danced." Close quote. Although he was attacked violently by his colleagues in the anti-clerical press, 15 days later, he renewed his testimony. And this time, he published a dozen photographs of the immense ecstatic crowd. And I want to point out, when you see the pictures of the people looking up, that's the Freemason pictures, if you've looked at pictures during the miracle. And he repeats as a refrain through his whole article, "I saw, I saw, I saw, I saw." He concludes, "Miracle, as the people shouted, natural phenomenon, as experts say, for the moment, that does not concern me. I am only affirming what I saw. The rest is a matter for science and the church." Close quotes. By the way, if you study those photographs, nearly everyone is staring at the sun, and almost none are shading their eyes. And you can see from the shadows, but there's a few of them, but you'll see all those people, and they're just staring right at it. Okay, anyway, that's a remarkable testimony in itself. The most terrifying aspect of the miracle took place immediately after the dance of the sun. The sun suddenly seemed to plunge towards earth. Quote, "Then, suddenly, one heard a clamor, a cry of anguish breaking from all the people. The sun, whirling wildly, seemed all at once to loosen itself from the firmament, and blood red plunged towards earth, threatened to crush us with its huge and fiery weight. The sensation during those moments was truly terrible. It seemed like a wheel of fire was going to fall on the people." Close quotes. Quote, "Everyone within an area of 32 miles thought it was the end of the world. One witness, who's later a contractor in California, was about 10 miles away from Fatima. At the time he was 12 years old, he was herding sheep. He said, 'I don't remember to this day what happened to the sheep. All I can remember is that this fireball came down upon the earth, and I knew I was about to be burnt alive. And I ran, and I ran, and I ran, and I ran.'" All I can remember is my fear. I've often waked up at night running from the fire. Quote, "We thought it was the end of the world. The fire of the sun was on top of us. At the time the fire was coming on us, there were shouts. Parents were throwing themselves, protecting all over their children. People were shouting their sins out loud, and confessing, crying for mercy. They fell to their knees in the mud and the water, confessed their sins, and called for mercy. And what happened? The fire went back into the sky." Close quotes. These are all quotes from eyewitnesses. Eyewitnesses who thought they were going to be burnt to death with fire falling from the heavens. Terrified parents instinctively throwing themselves over their children to protect them. People screaming out their sins and crying for mercy. Eyewitnesses who thought it was the end of the world. And all these people, who for the most part were soaked to the bone, were amazed to discover they were dry, and so was the ground. Quote, "This enormous multitude was drenched, for it rained unceasingly since dawn. But although this may appear incredible, after the great miracle, everyone felt comfortable and found his garments quite dry, a subject of general wonder. My suit dried in an instant. The moment one would least expect it, our clothes were totally dry." Close quotes. To those who might claim that the miracle was a product of mass hysteria or mass hypnosis at the scene, God himself had prearranged a rebuttal. Perfectly credible witnesses who were very far from Fatima saw the miracle of the sun. For example, the whole village of Alberitel, it's about 12 miles from Fatima, saw the miracle of the sun. Father Ignacio Lorenco recalls, quote, "I was only 9 years old at this time, and I went to the local village school. At about midday, we were surprised by the shouts and cries of some men and women who were passing the street. The teacher, a good pious woman, was the first to run into the road with the children after. Outside, the people were shouting and weeping and pointing to the sun. It was the great miracle, which one could see distinctly from the top of the hill where my village was situated. Objects around us turned all the colors of the rainbow. I feel incapable of describing what I saw and felt. I looked fixedly at the sun, which seemed pale and did not hurt the eyes. Looking like a ball of snow revolving upon itself, it suddenly seemed to come down in a zigzag, menacing the earth. Terrified, I ran and hid myself among the people who were weeping and expecting the end of the world at any moment." At least 70,000 witnesses braving the rain and mud. Suddenly the sky clears, the sun shoots out the colors of the rainbow, it whirls and spins and dances, then it seems to break free and hurtles towards earth. People convinced they're about to burn alive, fall to their knees in the mud and water, confess their sins, cry for mercy, and then the sun retreats, leaving everyone in dry clothes on dry ground. At least 70,000 witnesses. Thousands of them, not believers. Finally, there are also moral miracles, the conversions of many people. Quote, "The captain of the regiment of the soldiers on the mountain that day, with orders to prevent the gathering of the cloud, was converted instantly. So were hundreds of other unbelievers. There was an unbeliever there who had spent the morning mocking the simpletons who had gone off to Fatima just to see an ordinary girl. He now seemed paralyzed, his eyes fixed on the sun. He began to tremble from head to foot, and lifting up his arms, fell to his knees in the mud, crying out to God, 'Our Lady, Our Lady.'" Close quote. Remember that a miracle, like any natural event, is known either from personal observation or the testimony to others. The general rules for accepting testimony apply to miracles as to other facts of history. The evidence for miracles, as for historical facts in general, depends on the knowledge and veracity of the narrators. Such testimony we are not free to reject, otherwise we must deny all history whatsoever. If we have certain evidence for the fact, we are bound to accept it. We have no more rational warrant for rejecting miracles than for rejecting accounts of solar eclipses. So what have we seen? We've seen only a snippet of testimonies from the witnesses of the miracle of the sun, some of whom were radical anti-Catholics, some of whom were believers, all of whom were there in response to an unprecedented prediction that a miracle would occur on that date, in that place, at that very time. The believers were there in anticipation of seeing a miracle. The atheists and anti-clerical press were there, smirks firmly locked in place, with great expectations of dealing a crushing blow to all these Catholic morons. There are accounts published before the miracle mocking the predictions. I read you excerpts from 2 of them. There are photographs of the crowd. There are testimonies, written, taped, and filmed from massive numbers of the 70-some thousand witnesses. There are distant witnesses who could not possibly be accused of being under the influence of some sort of group hypnosis or suggestion. The conclusion is obvious. The miracle of the Son is a historical fact. Pure, plain, and simple. If, after considering the evidence, someone still wouldn't believe the miracle of the Son actually happened, it's perfectly reasonable to ask him, on what basis does he believe the Battle of the Alamo happened? There sure weren't 70 witnesses to that. There's an even easier question. Just ask him what his birthday is, and ask him on what basis does he believe that to be true? Because there certainly weren't 70,000 witnesses to that either. The miracle of the Son and the prophecy of that miracle, 3 months in advance, are verifiable historical facts. And it's obvious that both the precise fulfillment of that prophecy as to the date, time, and place, as well as the events of the miracle itself, can only be explained by direct acts of God Himself. Let's make sure we realize how utterly amazing this is by pausing for a moment to put this event into its proper historical context. If we stand back a little and consider the entire history of the world, to put the miracle of the Son in context, we can see that we have 5 roughly comparable events. 5 similar miracles of absolutely incredible magnitude. There's the parting of the Red Sea by Moses. There's the stopping of the sun and the moon in the sky by the prophet Joshua. There's the moving of the sun backwards in the sky 10 full hours by the prophet Isaiah. There's the total eclipse of the sun during a full moon, which is impossible. It took place at the crucifixion of our Lord. And there's the miracle of the Son by Our Lady. In the whole history of the world, there's only 5 of these miracles. 4 of those miracles are found in the Holy Bible. 3 in the Old Testament, 1 in the New Testament. And out of those miracles, there's only 1 that was predicted beforehand, 3 months beforehand. And we still have some very old people that were alive in 1917. That's Fatima. It's completely incredible. In the entire history of the world, the miracle of the Son is an absolutely unique and unparalleled event. It's absolutely unique. You should let that sink in. A unique event in history. We're being told something important here. Now let's stop and ask one last and very important question. Why did God perform that miracle? Now, obviously, it confirms the truth that Our Lady was appearing to the children and had a message. So the miracle points to her message to the children. But the miracle itself wasn't some random event. God never acts without a purpose. God never acts without a purpose. The miracle itself has a meaning. It's meant to tell us something. So what does the miracle mean in itself? Well, in this case, the apocalyptic overtones are obvious. That's not reading a meaning into the miracle after the fact, as we've just heard. The witnesses themselves were convinced of this. The nearly unanimous reaction of the witnesses was that they were seeing the end of the world. To see apocalyptic imagery in this miracle is also consistent with the tradition of the Church. In that regard, a few statements by the great doctor of the Church, St. Alphonsus Liguori, are well worth pondering. St. Alphonsus here is writing of the signs that will appear in the heavens before Judgment Day. And he's summarizing the teaching of the Fathers in regards to one line in the Gospel: the powers of heaven shall be moved. I read from St. Alphonsus. Another sign of the end of the world will be, and the powers of heaven shall be moved. Some understand this to mean tremors and unusual movements which will occur in the heavens. That is, the firmness of the heavens will seem to be lacking, as it will tremble before the Lord comes to judge the world. Close quote. End quote. The coming of the judge will be preceded by fire. Fire will descend from heaven, will burn the earth and all things upon the earth. The earth defiled by sin must be purified by fire. Close quote, St. Alphonsus Liguori. Tremors and unusual movements in the heavens. The firmness of the heavens will seem to be lacking as they will tremble. Fire will descend from heaven. I don't know what that sounds like to you, but to me that sounds like the miracle of the Son.